Welcome to the Mini Sculpting Super Show, episode 5. I'm your host, Tom Mason. We are completing the 15 millimeter miniature. So this is part 4 in the series. So put a link up here over here to show you the links to the other ones if you want to go back and start at the beginning. Right here, I wanted to talk about this. I had a lot of questions about the mix I was using of Putty. So right now, speeding it up just so it doesn't take so long, but basically take 1-to-1 mix of ProCreate. And from there, the second batch of material, the first two parts were the white and the resin and the hardener for the ProCreate. And then what you saw me get there was just some FIMO. And for that, I mix in about 25%. You can do more, which I actually prefer at times because it makes it feel more like clay, but it also creates it's a lot less sticky. So, which, I showed you mix it and that I mixed it, but here you'll see that I end up, oh no, I think I do use it. Anyways, yeah, so, but later on, as I wrap up the figure, I ended up needing to just use Greenstuff because the area of that I had for the putty to stick was just too small, and so the material wasn't sticking very well. I'm also trying a suggestion from some of the viewers where I speed up the video for certain parts and do some edits because I need to keep the time down, I believe. I don't think this is the place to do a fully non-time-lapsed video, but I tried to keep in some key parts where you could see me doing it in real time. So right here I was mainly just bulking up some areas, and bulked up the hand just to give a little more purchase for the putty when I did the final hand, and adding some material on the sword. Now I've slowed it down here because I started to put in the ears, and this is a smaller, more delicate part. The sword that I did earlier, it's just basically a big blob of putty on there. But I did, and this is key when working in 15 millimeter, you want to try and sculpt and do as much as you can right away, even for things that would be hard surface like weapons, swords, guns. You want to try and do as much as you can when it's wet and doing it out of one piece, because it's just, you just don't have the room to add on little bits of putty constantly. It's just too small and kind of unnecessary. So here I've in the previous video I had put like some little notches in his hood so that it could be exposed for some ears. Now I just put in a couple pieces of putty there and get back on the camera there. Oh, there we go. Just trimming it down to shape, trying to create that, and pressing in a bit to kind of give it the idea that it's protruding out of these little holes in his hood. I should say, right after finishing this, a couple days after finishing this recording of this sculpture, I received a really cool birthday present, and it's a I don't know what you call it. Anyway, it's some sort of arm prop-up thing that I can attach my camera to. So the purpose of this, so the way I've been sculpting here, you've obviously seen is I think I've showed it in a previous video, is it's very difficult for me to maintain the position of the sculpture and comfortably sculpt for a long period of time. It's a bit awkward, but I am happy with the angle. However, this new piece of equipment will allow me to have more control over where the camera is in space, and I can aim it better. So what's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to sit back in my natural sculpting position, which is just leaning back in a high back chair with my arms up near my face, and So we should still be able to give everyone a very good view and good lighting, and I will be able to sculpt a lot more comfortably, and be able to see what I'm doing better, because there's actually at times where it's quite difficult for me to get in very close to see and make sure I'm putting in good detail. Okay, so back to these ears here. I'm just kind of plucking them out a little bit more with the clay shaper, just so they're not right up against the head. And I did most of it with the scalpel there, just a couple lines that I cut in, and then get back on the camera. I fiddled with this this right ear quite a bit. I think I had to add on a little more putty. Yeah, so don't be afraid if you've already put some putty down. You can either rip off the entire area and put some new fresh putty down, or just add a little bit more. The only trick there is having to blend it in, which can sometimes be difficult, but it's definitely doable. Alright, so I wrapped up the ears there, and now you see I'm mixing Greenstuff, and this is a similar mix to the ProCreate. However, when I work with Greenstuff, and I'll talk more about this in a future video, I actually mix in more yellow than blue. So probably 25 to 50% more. It's a pretty good amount. I like mine to be a little more lighter green, like you see there. If you do straight half and half, it tends to be a little darker, and it's a firmer material. So again, if you like that, I've always said that I prefer working with softer clays and putties. It's just what feels more natural for me. But play with the mixes. You'll find something that works best for you. So this is the part I was talking about earlier, where I thought I was gonna, oops, dropped it. I thought I was going to have to use Greenstuff immediately, but I ended up needing to do it because the ProCreate is slightly less tacky than Greenstuff anyways, and then when you mix putty into it, it can lose a bit more. And when doing these hands, they're just so small, and there was very thin, only a thin layer that I could put on for them because of how much I bulked up, which again, if you're going to bulk up these, you have to keep it very thin. So I just decided to do Greenstuff, which turned out pretty well. It was a little tricky because it was very wanted to be very rounded, and so it took a little bit of finesse to make it more of a defined angular shapes in areas that needed to have more defined edges, things like that. That reminds me, so man, this whole process of doing this miniature really, I could just tell that I haven't worked this way in a long time. I have actually been working on a couple miniatures that have been basically conversions, so I have been doing some putty work, but even still, it's very different when you're doing an entire model from the ground up with putty, and there's just a lot of little things to consider, and probably the biggest thing I would suggest to anyone working with putty is don't be afraid to put more material on when it's still wet, when it's uncured. And this is something that I always struggled with and I never was good at, but I've been purposely trying it on these newer figures I'm working on right now. And that, yeah, you don't have to set it aside and let the whole thing cure. In fact, it's sometimes better to keep going. You do have to be mindful that you're not shifting any material underneath, and obviously you don't touch the figure and put your big fingerprint in it anywhere, but don't be scared to keep adding on more elements and keeping things moving. And how you can translate that entire advice to the 15mm realm here is you know, I showed you initially how you can bulk it up very thinly. I still think that's a good idea, but you know, I basically did many more bulking stages and added on this little bit and then that little bit, and I wish that I had tackled more of it at once. And part of it came down to the time I had to work on this figure. I had to break it up, which naturally forced me to have to stop and work in smaller sections. So, but especially with 15mm miniatures, there's no reason that you can't or shouldn't sit down and do quite a lot of it in a sitting. I mean, these things can be busted out in a few hours once you have the hang of it, if not less. I actually know a couple sculptors that can do one of these an hour. Depends on some of the details and what it is, of course, but it's pretty impressive. But the only way to do that is to not wait for things to cure. You do one stage and then you move on to the next part. And some of that, and that's yeah, there's so much to talk about in the next video. The next video is going to be on sculpting with putty specifically, specific techniques, talking about the different mixtures and kind of things you want to do. And I'll do my best to explain this, and hopefully you guys will enjoy it, because it is very crucial. You know, like I said, even though I'm primarily a FIMO sculptor, there are many times that I still use putty, and it's a very useful skill to be able to use, even though I don't prefer to sculpt entire figures that way. But I want to make sure everybody sculpts, and if this is what you like, this is what you have and are familiar with, then I want to share with you whatever knowledge I have. Alright, I'm just cutting in the fingers now. You know, I'll reiterate that, you know, it's very important to do your best to get the basic forms all laid in there before you start doing any sort of details with slices and cuts. And the biggest reason for that is it's hard to blend if you make a mistake. So say the hand shape on the holding the sword was wrong, like the index finger was too thin. There wasn't enough material there, so it looked like his finger was sitting into the knife or something. Well, if I had gone ahead and cut the putty when it was like that, and I realized, oh shoot, I have to redo that, well, you'd have to try and blend it in, and it tends to, you can see, it basically can create like a seam, so you can still see that. So it's very good and helpful to have the basic shape done first, because then from there, if you do need to make adjustments, you just do light finessing touches with your clay shaper or a metal tool if you need something a little smaller, more precise, like I'm doing here. And you might notice, I'm not sure how well it'll come across because this thing is so small, but on the right hand, you might be able to catch a glimpse that it's a lot more rounded, and part of that is because it was just on a ball of putty. There wasn't as much for the Greenstuff to wrap around and to inform the form. So where he's holding on to the little sword in the other hand, you know, there's a natural contour that gets created to make the fingers, and it almost naturally forms the way the hand would have to be. The fingers would have to be positioned to hold that. Whereas the other hand, the right hand, the fingers wanted to kind of wrap around and just create like a ball shape, if that makes sense, where the index finger is pressed far too much into the hand instead of being more of a gradual angle where it rises. You know, the pinky is lowest on your hand, and then as you travel up, if you make a fist, you can see that the index finger ends up kind of like tilting up to a degree. I don't know if this is making any sense. I don't know if I'm using good descriptors, but hopefully you're getting what I'm saying. So I'm just doing a couple little touches here with a little probe tool to kind of suggest the depressions in the hand where the between the bones and tendons. And some last minute smoothing there, so I think I'm going to go ahead and speed this part up. You're kind of getting the idea of what I'm doing. There's just a lot of little finessing that needs to go on at the very end. Here we go. So this last little stage, everything's cured, and then I just take an X-Acto blade here, and I'm just scraping along the blade there to just kind of refine and define the edge a little more. Okay, so there you go. There you have it. I took some pictures, as you're seeing now, of the final 15mm goblin figure, so you can see him from all the angles and how it turned out. Hopefully it's a little easier to see exactly how it turned out rather than just in the video. So I have some very exciting news. I was able to secure not one, but 2 interviews with industry sculptors right now. They're 2 guys that I'm a big fan of their work, and they're doing some really unique stuff. So I'm very excited to be able to share that with you guys, and I will have at least one of them up this month. So look forward to that. I'd like to thank all the people on Patreon for supporting these videos and making it possible. And their support enables me to get this equipment that I need to do a better job and spend more time making the videos. And so, yeah, thank you for that. If you'd like to support the channel as well, please go visit. Links down below or up in the corner there. And, yeah, see what it's all about. Patreon also helps me choose the next videos that I'm going to do tutorials on. So I've got lots of ideas and lots of things in the hopper, but your voice is heard over there, and I try and prioritize the tutorials and things that people want to see there. So head on over there and check it out. As always, leave a comment below with any questions. I'll do my best to answer everything that people put up there. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And as always, keep sculpting.